Let's talk about the web vulnerabilities and the protections against them. First of all, I would like to give you introduction. What is the web vulnerability? A website vulnerability is a software code flaw, bug, system misconfiguration, or some other weaknesses in the website, web application, or its components and the processes. Web application vulnerabilities enable attackers to gain unauthorized access to system processes, mission-critical assets of the organization. Having such access, attackers can orchestrate attacks, take over applications, engage in privilege escalation to exfiltrate data, cause large-scale service disruption, and so on. With a clear understanding of what website vulnerabilities are and how they can be prevented, organizations can be better equipped to avert attacks and harden their security posture. This part of the lecture will enable you to doing so. The common types of website vulnerabilities. Let's talk shortly about these vulnerabilities. The first common web vulnerability is SQL injection. SQL injection vulnerabilities enable attackers to inject malicious code, unsanitized inputs into SQL queries. By doing so, attackers can gain access to unauthorized information, modify, create, delete, manipulate sensitive data and the user permissions. This is one of the most prevalent web application vulnerabilities. The second one is cross-site scripting, or XSS. XSS vulnerabilities enable attackers to compromise user interactions with web applications, orchestrate impersonations, and phishing attacks by allowing them to inject malicious scripts on the client side. This typically occurs when applications accept input from untrusted sources and allow unvalidated inputs in the user input fields such as forms, comments, messages, boards, etc. Cross-site request forgery, it's CSRF vulnerabilities. CSRF vulnerabilities trick the unsuspecting users into unknowingly performing actions for the attacker. During CSRF attacks, the attacker may utilize the user's authentication authorization to exfiltrate, modify, or delete data, or transfer funds, or send other requests masquerading as the user. And the next type of web vulnerability, it's the security misconfigurations. These website vulnerabilities occur when security controls and the configuration of any of the multiple layers of the website application, server, network services, platform, framework, databases, etc. are improperly implemented or implemented with serious gaps and errors. Examples of security misconfiguration include use of legacy components, unused pages, features, unpatched software, etc., leaving unnecessary admin ports open, or enabling outbound connections to internet services, or enabling directory services, and so on. The next type of web vulnerability is broken authentication and the session management. These are web vulnerabilities that allow attackers to capture or bypass authentication methods used by the website, web application. By bypassing authentication and the session identifiers, the attacker could engage in impersonation, identify, and the data theft, account takeover, and so on. Examples of them is weak password security, predictable login credentials, session ID exposure in the URL, session values not timing out, passwords, session IDs, and the credentials are not sent and or restored securely. The next type of web application vulnerability is sensitive data exposure. This website vulnerability arises when sensitive information is not protected, making it easy for attackers to gain access to it. Sensitive information includes username, password, session token, credit card data, medical records, etc. Sensitive data exposure is caused when the website does not have in place proper data encryption, tokenization, key management, etc. You can ask, how can a website vulnerability be exploited? Website vulnerabilities are unavoidable, and the most website web application will have a few vulnerabilities. The two key concerns for organizations should be the exploitability factor associated with the vulnerabilities. Web app vulnerabilities are exploitable when there are no proper security measures in place to prevent attackers from finding and taking advantage of vulnerabilities. The factors that affect the exploitability of a vulnerability are the complexity associated with exploitation and the availability of active or known exploits. Based on this, the risk associated with the vulnerability is calculated, and the vulnerabilities are categorized in the critical, high, medium, and low risk. The critical and the high risk vulnerabilities must be fixed and protected on a high priority basis. Let's. I would like to give some facts and from the this from the practice area of the cybersecurity. 70 first example is 75% of attacks leveraged web application vulnerabilities that were known at least for 2 years. 80% of exploits were published even more before the CVE, it's the Common Vulnerability and Exposure Database, related to that exploit was made public. This means instead of organizations steering ahead of attackers had the first mover advantage in most exploits. Preventing exploitation of web application vulnerabilities. Website vulnerabilities can be prevented from exploitation with security measures such as up-to-date data encryption, strong access controls, and authentication measures, user input validation, secure coding practices, patching of identified vulnerabilities, and the good cyber hygiene practices. The best way to prevent the exploitation of website vulnerabilities is to be proactive. Organizations need to gain first mover advantage by identifying and patching vulnerabilities before attackers can. For that case, we use pen testing to check for a website vulnerabilities. Regular intelligent scanning and pen testing by trusted experts are necessary. Upon discovery, developers work to fix and patch the website vulnerabilities. During this period, which could take 100 days or more, the vulnerability is unprotected. Attackers can snoop around and detect vulnerabilities before they can be patched if they are not properly secured. Within an intelligent managed web application firewall, such as Aptrana, in-place organizations can effectively secure vulnerabilities through virtual patching until they are fixed by developers. With the insights and the visibility provided by Aptrana, organizations can fortify website security. Also, I would like to talk about the OWASP. What is OWASP and the OWASP Top 10? The Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP, is an international non-profit organization dedicated to web application security. One of the OWASP's core principles is that all of the materials be freely available and easily accessible on their website, making it possible for anyone to improve their own web application security. The materials they offer include documentation, tools, videos, and the forums. Perhaps their best known project is WASP Top 10. The WASP Top 10 is a regularly updated report outlining security concerns for web application security, focusing on the 10 most critical risks